Hello viewers, welcome back to the Moose Mobile Auto Repair channel, and today we have a 2015 Toyota Sienna with the 3.5 liter engine, and this particular Sienna is the front wheel drive version. And the customer's complaint today is that the check engine light is on and the traction control and the ABS light is also on. And they called me over to have a look at it last week. And so I pulled the codes to see if it's anything serious. And there was a P013A trouble code for the bank 1 sensor 2 oxygen sensor for slow response from rich to lean condition. Now, I have dealt with this trouble code before in the past, and this is a very intermittent code, and so it takes a while for this trouble code to come back. And so the P013A trouble code basically means that the computer didn't see on what it wanted, and so it saw that the voltage for the bank 1 sensor 2 oxygen sensor did not drop to a certain threshold in a certain period of time. And so it triggers the check engine light to come on. And so this particular code is very sensitive. And so the computer is looking to see that the oxygen sensor is working properly. And so because this vehicle has just over 346,000 kilometers on it, it's the original sensor. The oxygen sensors, they start to get lazy as they age. Due to that, the vehicle is 10 years old now, and so as they age, the sensors, they get slower and lazier in responding. So they get lazy to respond in time, so that the computer can adjust the air and fuel mixture according to driving conditions. And so right now, I already did a brief inspection. The first thing you want to check is to go for a road test and to monitor all of the oxygen and air fuel sensors to make sure that they are operating correctly and they should be responding as they should. I'm going to be putting the diagnostic towards the end of the video so I don't bore you guys out. So I'm just going to show on how to replace the sensor first, and then later I'm going to put the diagnostic video at the very end, because I know that some people, they're not really interested in the diagnostic. They're more interested in replacing the part. I do have another video of this same trouble code, P013A, for the all-wheel drive Sienna that I worked on. They are very similar to this Sienna, but I decided I wanted to put out some more content, so I'm going to be making this video. So from my understanding, when I looked in Identifix service information, the threshold is from 0.35 volts to 0.2 volts in a given amount of time. I forget how many seconds. There's a certain amount of time that the oxygen sensor voltage, it must drop from 0.35 to 0.2 volts in a certain given period of time. And so since the computer did not like on what it saw, it turned the check engine light on, because it saw that there's a problem and that the O2 sensor is getting lazy. So today I'm going to be replacing the bank 1 sensor 2, which is the downstream oxygen sensor with the NTK part number 24687. You can use this, or you can use the denso oxygen sensor. It doesn't really matter. These sensors are just as good as the denso sensors, so it's up to you on which one you want to use. Just don't use the cheap aftermarket ones. Make sure you get a good quality sensor. Now, these particular sensors are very delicate, so be careful to not drop them and handle them with care, because they have a special fragile element inside the sensor, so you need to be careful with it. Just make sure that when you open it up, that everything is sealed and everything is intact. Everything should be easily a plug and play. There should be no need to splice or cut wires or anything like that. You should be able to plug this in easily. So this particular sensor is a 4-wire sensor. There's 4 pins and 4 wires. So it's a 4-wire oxygen sensor. It's pre-lubricated with the anti-seize when you remove the plastic. So there's no need to add additional anti-seize. On some other oxygen sensor boxes, it may come with anti-seize separately, so you will need to open up the packet and to add the anti-seize on the threads of the sensor. So in order to know on which one is bank 1 and bank 2, you need to find cylinder number 1, which is in the back here. Cylinder number 1 is in the back, which is closest to the timing chain. And so the arrangement for the cylinders here is 135 for the front. This is bank 1. So bank 1 is going to be in the back at the bottom of the vehicle. That's bank 1. And then you have cylinders 2, 4, 6, which is bank 2. This is bank 2. So we're looking for bank 1, sensor 2. Bank 1 is in the back. So we need to go underneath the vehicle to access bank 1, sensor 2, which is the downstream sensor. So before we start, we need to open up the driver's door. And we need to remove the plastic trim panel, because the oxygen sensor connector, it runs from here all the way down to outside the vehicle. So we need to use like a trim tool to remove this out of the way. So what you need to do is to pull back on the panel here, to pull back, and you'll have access to the oxygen sensor connector. So you just need to push on the tab at the bottom. It's just the clip. You can disconnect the connector tab. Disconnect this, and then you should be able to get it out from the bottom. So you can see here that there's a rubber grommet that's in the corner there. So we need to take that out. So you just need to use your fingers to push the grommet in to get it out. So take it outside from outside the vehicle. You should be able to get the connector through. So the bank 1 sensor 2 is located right here in the exhaust, just before the Y pipe, and where this goes to the bottom pipe goes to bank 2, and the top pipe goes to bank 1. So this is the sensor that we need to take out. You may need to heat this up with a torch before removing it. depending if it cooperates and removes easily or not. And one thing I wanted to mention is to check for any exhaust leaks. Check for any exhaust leaks before and after the piping. And I know that these particular Siennas, they leak ever so slightly here, but it's like a negligible amount, so I don't think it's anything to worry about unless it's actively leaking. Like you turn the vehicle on and you can feel and hear that it's leaking from here, but otherwise I would not worry about this. This is probably from all of the moisture and condensation over the years. So if it's not an obvious visible leak, I would not really worry about it. Otherwise, if you do have a leak here, you would have to replace the donut gasket and with the bolt and spring kit on both sides of this the secondary catalytic converter. This catalytic converter over here is not monitored by the O2 and air fuel sensors. This is just an additional catalytic converter to reduce pollution. So anyhow, you can see that I removed this from the opening. It's located over here, just where the fuel and brake lines are. There's an opening here. So that's where you are going to insert the new O2 sensor in the connector. Now in some cases you can warm the vehicle up to get the exhaust warmed up, and that might help to remove the sensor easier. So I'm going to try to remove the sensor now with the wrench. This is a 22 millimeter wrench. So I think in this case I'm going to heat it up. So in this case we are going to use the map torch to heat this up, and that should be fine. Just be careful to not get the flame near an open source of like fuel or something like that. So be careful. I'm just gonna heat this up a tad bit. Let's see if this works now. Just need to give it a little bit of heat. There you go. It's working now. All loosened up. Hopefully that the threads are okay. Just need to be careful when you're removing this. So I'm going to use my welding gloves so that I don't get burnt. Oh, that's the sensor. It's still a little bit hot. Sometimes I like to spray a tiny amount of penetrating oil to make it easier to install the new sensor. I'm just going to spray a tad bit. Just to make it easier. We're going to install a new sensor. It came with a new zip tie and stuff, so I have to see if we are going to use it. So there's already NTCs in here, so install a new sensor now. Being careful to not place the wire on the hot exhaust that you heated up, because that's going to melt the wires. It's a little bit hard to work here, a bit cramped on where I'm working. As you thread this in, you're going to have to support and route the wires through so that you can thread it in by hand. So once it's tightened by hand, you can use a wrench to make it snug. Doesn't have to be all that tight. Grab the 22 wrench and snug it up. You don't have to kill it, just until it's tight. You don't want it too tight or too loose, just enough to crush the crush washer gasket that's underneath here. There's a gasket, so you want to make sure that you tighten it just enough to crush that washer to make a perfect seal. There is a torque spec. Usually there's a range. I'll have to check on what the paper manual states that came with the sensor. I think that's good. So now we just need to reroute this back inside the hole for the grommet. You might need to push on the wire first to get it through the hole before you put the grommet in. So to take away the slack. So that way the wire doesn't rub or touch anything. So it doesn't destroy the wire when the vehicle is being driven. So we're going to install the grommet. And once you got the grommet in, you'll need to push it out. You can either push it out from here or from the driver's end to flatten it out. So we will fix that from inside the vehicle. So this looks good. And later I'm just going to wash down the residue with some brake cleaner. So this is the old sensor, the lazy oxygen sensor, and it came with a new zip tie. You may need to use this for the I think for the all-wheel drive models. I'm not sure. If you need to use it, you can use it. If you don't need it, you can just just keep it. So now go inside the driver's side and you will be able to see the connector. So just reconnect it to the computer side. So reconnect the connector now to the computer side of the O2 sensor. Make sure you hear an affirmative click and reinstall to the clip. Sorry for all the noise. There's an airplane that's flying over here in the sky every 2 minutes, so it gets a little like noisy here sometimes. Just trying to insert this in properly. I think that should be okay now. Everything is in properly. It's nice and firm. Make sure there isn't anything loose or rubbing against anything. Then you should be all good to go from there. We are going to check the grommet to make sure it's seated in so we don't get any like water coming from inside. So you just make sure that the grommet is seated in properly, and then you should be all good to go. You can put a zip tie here if you want, or on however you want to do it. It doesn't matter. And then just put the plastic covers back. Just reinstall the plastic covers. This should be underneath. And then later I'm going to clean everything down and wipe everything down for the customer after I'm done. Just needs to go behind somehow. Cheap plastic, but you gotta be careful. There is a clip here that I forgot to show you in the back. It's just easier to take that out. I didn't take that out earlier, so there's one clip there and one clip over here. So make sure you take those clips out. Should be able to install this back without issue. Okay, and then just going to reinstall that clip. Reinstall that clip after you are done. Need to line this up a little bit more. You should be all good to go. Next thing you need to do is just to clear the codes, go for a road test and make sure to verify the readings for the O2 sensor. Wash down the area down with some brake cleaner. Either if you wash it or not, it doesn't really matter. It's going to burn off anyways, but still, wash everything down. And then later just go for a road test, verify for proper operation. Make sure you clear the codes first, and then that's going to be it. The codes have already been cleared already, and they never came back about after a week, so there isn't anything to clear. So just make sure the O2 sensor is positioned correctly, and you should be all good to go. Make sure the wire is not hanging down or anything, so this looks good. So we are just going to start the engine for a bit, just verify that there's no leaks over here where the sensor is, and then you should be all good to go. So that's going to conclude the video of this 2015 Toyota Sienna for the Bank 1 Sensor 2 oxygen sensor replacement. So just verify for leaks, make sure everything is okay, and then go for a road test, get the vehicle to operating temperature, so the air, fuel, and the oxygen sensors are operating properly at the correct temperatures, and just verify that the oxygen sensor is reading as it should. I won't be able to show you the confirmation because it's a very intermittent trouble code, so I won't be able to show you anything because you won't be able to see the numbers fluctuate and stuff in which the computer was looking for. So one last thing, I couldn't find the torque spec on the paper, but it's probably something like 18 foot-pounds, 18 to 35 foot-pounds, I'm not sure. You will need like a crow's foot type of a adapter with a torque wrench, but in these cases, I tighten it up snug, and that should be fine. So before we continue with the diagnostic, we want to go on to service information. I'm on Identifix, and so I search the trouble code for P013A. So we want to know a little bit of the description and operation to see on how this trouble code works and how the trouble code is triggered or stored in the vehicle's computer when there's a fault in this system. And so you go here, you see oxygen sensor slow response, rich to lean, bank 1 sensor 2, which is the downstream sensor of the exhaust. And so it says there's some information about the description. I'm not going to go through everything completely, but I'll just go through this quickly to give you guys a better understanding on how this works. So it says in order to obtain a high purification rate of the carbon monoxide CO, hydrocarbon HC, and nitrogen oxide NOx components in the exhaust gas for the three-way catalytic converter, and for the most efficient use of the TWC, the air-fuel ratio must be precisely controlled so that it is always close to the stoichiometric air-fuel level, for the purpose of helping the ECM engine control module to deliver accurate air-fuel ratio control. A heated oxygen sensor is used. The heated oxygen sensor is located behind the TWC, the three-way catalytic converter, and detects the oxygen concentration in the exhaust gas. Since the sensor is integrated with the heater that heats the sensing portion, it is possible to detect the oxygen concentration even when the intake air volume is low. The exhaust gas temperature is low. When the air-fuel ratio becomes lean, the oxygen concentration in the exhaust gas is high. The heated oxygen sensor informs the ECM that the post TWC air-fuel ratio is lean, low voltage. It said i.e. less than 0.45 volts. Conversely, when the air-fuel ratio is richer than the stoichiometric air-fuel level, the oxygen concentration in the exhaust gas is low. The heated oxygen sensor informs the ECM that the post-TWC air-fuel ratio is rich, high voltage, i.e. higher than 0.45 volts. The heated oxygen sensor has the property of changing its output voltage drastically when the air-fuel ratio is close to the stoichiometric level. The ECM uses the supplementary information from the heated oxygen sensor to determine whether the air-fuel ratio after the TWC is rich or lean and adjust the fuel injection duration accordingly. Thus, if the heated oxygen sensor is working improperly due to internal malfunction, the ECM is unable to compensate for deviations in the primary air fuel ratio control. So this gives you a picture on how the oxygen sensor works. So it just gives you an outline on what it is. So when I go to DTC detection condition diagnostic trouble code for P013A, it says heated oxygen sensor voltage does not drop from 0.35 volts to 0.2 volts immediately after fuel cut starts, and this is a one trip logic. So this will trip with a single key cycle, and it says trouble area, heated oxygen sensor bank 1 2 sensor 2 circuit, heated oxygen sensor bank 1 2 sensor 2, or a gas leak from the exhaust system. If there's a considerable amount of an exhaust leak, this can also trip this code. If the exhaust leak is very tiny, like a negligible amount of exhaust leak, it may not trip this code. I believe the exhaust leak has to be considerable enough for it to trip this code. If there's a leak, in the post catalytic converter on bank 1, which is in the back of the engine, because cylinder 1 is in the back, so bank 1 would be in the back, bank 2 would be in the front of the vehicle. So anyhow, I'm just going to scroll down a little bit more. I'm not going to read everything because I'm going to bore you guys out. And so it says, this is the active air fuel ratio control. Is performed approximately 15 to 20 seconds while driving with a warm engine. So in order to test and diagnose the oxygen sensor issue, the engine has to be warmed up first before you proceed with the diagnosis, because oxygen sensors and the catalytic converters don't operate properly until it's at operating temperature. And so the oxygen, basically the computer control has to be in closed loop mode in order for the oxygen sensors to work properly. So anyhow, it just shows me a graph here. This is for the P013A P01356 code. So this does not apply in our situation here. We are looking for P013A. So I'm going to scroll down. You see here number 7, abnormal voltage output of heated oxygen sensor during fuel cut from rich condition, DTC P013A and P013C. If the sensor output voltage does not drop from 0.3 to 0.2 volts immediately when the vehicle decelerates and fuel cut is operating, the ECM illuminates the malfunction indicator lamp, which is the check engine light, and stores the diagnostic trouble code. And because that the computer did not like on what it saw, it will store this code. And from my experience, this trouble code is an intermittent code. So the engine computer will store this code, but if you clear it, it will not come back right away. It usually takes a long time for this code to come back, because this is an intermittent code, because it must fulfill this parameter, and if it doesn't, then it's going to trip this trouble code. And so the oxygen sensor is very precise, and so the computer is constantly watching on what the oxygen sensor is doing. This issue will not really affect too much performance. Really, you won't really notice drivability problems with a downstream oxygen sensor. Usually with the air fuel sensors, the bank 1 sensor 1, the upstream sensors, that will usually affect drivability and fuel consumption for the most part. This one won't affect drivability much, or not at all, and you might see maybe very, very slight reduction in gas mileage, but other than that, a majority of customers will not notice anything. The vehicle will still drive relatively fine. The only reason the customer would come to me is because the check engine light is on. There won't be any drivability issues for this trouble code. And so as I go down here, I'm checking, just gathering some information to help me diagnose the oxygen sensor code. And I know that 9 out of 10 times, usually when you put an oxygen sensor on a vehicle, that's going to fix the problem. It's just that 1 out of 10 times it may not be the oxygen sensor, it may be something else. So I'm just looking for P013A. It's highlighted here. It said heated oxygen sensor response rate during fuel cut from rich condition. These are the conditions for the, I believe it's for when the code trips. So it must be 11 volts battery voltage, 11 volts or higher, engine coolant temperature 167 degrees Fahrenheit or 75 Celsius, catalyst temperature 752 Fahrenheit, and fuel cut on. I believe this is during deceleration, when you're off the accelerator pedal. Then it says typical malfunction thresholds. So P013A right here, duration that rear oxygen sensor voltage drops from 0.35 to 0.2 volts during fuel cut, normalize. And it says key cycles is 1 or more times. This is just the confirmation driving pattern after the fix, but that's for the other code. This does not apply for the P013A. So go down right here, P013A. So this is what you have to do to confirm that if the oxygen sensor is okay. You have to follow this. Warm up the vehicle during idle. Then 10 minutes or more driving at 60 kilometers an hour, 37 miles approximately. You need to keep it constant. Drive the vehicle while keeping the engine load as constant as possible. And then this is D. I'm just going to go back here. So D
Enter the following menus: powertrain, engine control, trouble codes. Engine trouble codes. So this is just the instructions on what to do on the scan tool. In the majority of cases, I warm up the vehicle. I go for a test drive, and once the engine has reached somewhere around operating temperature, then that's when I start doing the diagnosis to check the scan data on the scan tool for the short and long term fuel trims and the oxygen and air fuel sensors. So this tells you a little bit on what to do to verify the operation of the oxygen sensor. So I'm just going to go down. This is the wiring diagram. Sometimes oxygen sensors, they have like a fuse and or a relay sometimes. So some vehicles have a separate fuse for the oxygen sensor. So sometimes you want to check that, but I think that's for only the heater circuit only, not for the oxygen sensor itself. So I'm going down, just checking some stuff, information. I'm not going to go through all of this because it's just too much to do for the video. This is for if you want to check the heater circuit, but in this case the heater circuit is working fine, so we are not going to check that. It's just that the oxygen sensor is lazy, so it just didn't meet the threshold point that the computer wanted to see, and so it sets the check engine light for that. So I think that's going to be it for this one. So we are going to go for a road test now, and just verify the readings on the scan tool. And usually this code is again, as I said, it's an intermittent code, and so you may not be able to see much on the scan tool, especially when you are graphing this. So you may not see anything. So in most cases, when I see this code, I've seen this code before, like maybe half a dozen times or so. And usually it's just a bad sensor. I just end up replacing the sensor. But it's always a good idea to do a visual inspection after reading all of this, going for a road test, and then later to do just a quick visual inspection, make sure that the wiring and everything is okay. There's no major exhaust leaks that's causing any of these problems. And so that's going to be it. We're going to go ahead and and go for a road test now. So during the road test, I'm using the Blue Driver Bluetooth scan tool on my cell phone. It's just easier for me to use, and so I'm monitoring the Bank 1 Sensor 2 oxygen sensor voltage readings, and at the same time I'm just having a look at the short-term and long-term fuel trims, mainly on Bank 1. I do have Bank 2 on the scan tool here, but I'm not able to show everything on the one screen. And so anyhow, I'm just having a look for the Bank 1 Sensor 2 oxygen sensor switching activity to see on what the voltage is. So usually the stoichiometric voltage would be ideally around 0.5 volts, which is the ideal 14.7 to 1 ratio. And so when I accelerate, I would expect that the sensor to go closer to 0.7, 0.8, 0.9 volts. So that would signify a rich condition. And when I'm decelerating, should drop to somewhere around 0.0, 0.1, 0.2 volts. The oxygen sensors, they operate usually between a range of 0.1 to 0.9 volts. So the lower the voltage is a lane condition, the higher the voltage is a rich condition. And so the oxygen sensors are classified as narrow band sensors, and the air fuel ratio sensors are classified as wide band sensors because they have a wider range in voltage. And so there's a reference voltage on the Toyota vehicles, which is usually around 3.3 volts during idle. And so this reference voltage is just an imaginary number that's used, and this is only for Toyota vehicles. Other vehicles, it will vary. They'll have a different type of reference voltage, but for Toyotas it's usually 3.3 volts. And so I do have a look at everything here with the vehicle warmed up, of course, and I'm watching for the air fuel sensors as well to make sure that they are working properly. So 5 volts would indicate a lane condition, and 1 volt or 0 volts would be a rich condition. Now typically when I accelerate on from a steady cruise at about 60 kilometers an hour, you'll see the voltage spike to 5 volts, and then eventually it'll drop. You don't normally see that it goes to 1 volt, but once it reaches 5 volts, it'll start dropping to like 2.2, 2.6 or something like that. It doesn't necessarily go all the way down to 1 volt, but that's what the rule of thumb is. That's what the reading on what I'm looking for. So in this video, the air fuel sensors, they are working as it should, and I did read on service information that there is some delay time for the air fuel sensors and for the oxygen sensors before they actually start reacting on the scan tool. And so everything seemed normal here. It's just I don't see anything out of the ordinary. The fuel trims are normal. They should be no more than plus minus 10 at the most. Maybe on Toyotas, these Toyotas, no more than plus or minus 8 at the most. But the rule of thumb is plus or minus 10 at the most. And so the fuel trims are reading okay. They are well in that range. So I'm not suspecting any issues like, for example, leaking fuel injectors or a vacuum leak or anything like that, because the fuel trims are reading pretty close to 0, and that's what we want here. So I'm not seeing any issues with the engine here. It's just that the bank 1 sensor 2 is just a little lazy, and this Bluetooth Blue Driver scan tool has the capability of graphing and showing the numbers at the same time. So I can't really explain too much more in depth at the moment, but the O2 sensor is reading as it should, and it's reacting to my driving habits whether I'm accelerating or cruising or decelerating, it's doing on what it should. And so you can't exactly pick this up when you are diagnosing the O2 sensor code for P013A, because as I said earlier, it's an intermittent code, and usually at this point only the computer can pick this up, because it's really difficult to analyze and see. So it's really difficult to see the abnormality here within the sensor, because it's a very, very tiny variation, and so we cannot really see that through us analyzing the graph and the numbers. So it's really hard to see that. So at this point, I just diagnose this as an intermittent code, because the computer did not see the switching activity from rich to lean from 0.35 to 0.2 volts within a given time frame. So at the end, after the repair, I just did another reading of the scan tool to see the readings for the bank 1 sensor 2, just to make sure that it's reading as it should. I did, however, I noticed that the switching activity was a little bit more than what the previous oxygen sensor reading was. And so because the old sensor was getting lazy, so it wouldn't react as fast as the new sensor. However, this is not to be mistaken with the diagnosing for a bad catalytic converter, because if the bank 1 sensor 2, which is the rear oxygen sensor, switches too often, it could signify that there could be a problem with the catalytic converter. And so I will probably discuss a little bit about that later on, and maybe in my future videos, on how to diagnose a bad catalytic converter, because shortly after a couple days, a P013A inefficiency code popped up on this vehicle after I replaced the sensor. But I will discuss about that later on in this video, and later in a future video. But for now, I'm just going to let this video go, and you guys can have a look at the readings just for a reference point, and that's going to be it.
So just a little bit of an update on this 2015 Sienna after I replaced the Bank 1 Sensor 2 oxygen sensor, which was on a Sunday afternoon, and now it's Tuesday morning. The customer told me that the check engine light came back on after a couple days, and the check engine light came on sooner than last time after I cleared the codes. And this was after replacing Bank 1 Sensor 2 oxygen sensor for the P013A. And I did also notice that there is some black soot at the secondary catalytic converter that is not monitored by the computer. There's a little bit of an exhaust leak, and initially I thought it would be the same code because if there is a pinhole exhaust leak, even the slightest exhaust leak, it can disturb and upset the oxygen sensor readings for the Bank 1 Sensor 2 oxygen sensor. This is also the case for the other sensors too, but the rear oxygen sensor is responsible for monitoring the efficiency of the catalytic converter. So in this case, this is Bank 1, and so I pulled up the trouble codes, and it's now showing a P013A code for catalyst system efficiency below threshold on Bank 1, the same bank which I replaced the oxygen sensor on. And so because before the Bank 1 Sensor 2 oxygen sensor, it was getting lazy, and in general, oxygen sensors are already lazy due to their design, only for the oxygen sensors, not for the air fuel sensors. And so after replacing it, the oxygen sensor is more active. There's more activity when I check the confirmation on live data to check the parameter IDs on live data. And so I could see the switching activity was a little bit faster than what it was before. And so because replacing the sensor with a new one, it can now see, the oxygen sensor is now working at peak efficiency. And so now it sees that there's a problem with the catalytic converter on Bank 1. This isn't a false code. This means that the catalytic converter is not working properly, is not working as it should. Although it's still, at this particular moment, it's not severely bad or clogged up. You can still drive the vehicle for some time, so we'll see on what happens. I'm probably going to address the exhaust leak first before I continue with the catalytic converter code, because sometimes an exhaust leak can cause problems, and so I'm going to deal with that first. I don't know if I showed it in the video, but you could see condensation and water was dripping from the secondary cat about maybe half a foot or so away from the Bank 1 Sensor 2. So I'm probably going to fix that, even though that it's a very minor leak that can still cause problems. So I'm going to fix that first. So you can see the check engine light is on and the traction control is off. And I pulled up the scan tool, my Bluetooth blue driver scan tool, and you can see P013A is stored. So that's going to be a separate diagnostic, but it's most likely intermittent. But I'm going to check this out and address all of the concerns and notify the customer of what's happening now. So I'm going to fix the exhaust leak for the most part, but I still have a feeling that the catalytic converter is probably bad on this, and the code, it may come back again, but we'll see on what happens. I'll discuss to the customer and see on what they want to do. So fast forward a few days from now, the customer told me that the check engine light came back on. It's going to come back on every a couple days or so. And so I already told the customer that it's probably going to come back again. And so I just wanted to say that for some of you guys who are trying to fix the initial P013 trouble code by replacing the bank 1 sensor 2 oxygen sensor, you probably need the oxygen sensor anyways, but you probably want to check for the exhaust leak just about half a foot or so away from that sensor, where the secondary catalytic converter is. The converter that is not monitored by the engine computer. And so I've seen a lot of these Sienna vans in which they have a tendency to have a small leak. You'll see some black soot on where the gaskets are. So it's a tiny leak, and sometimes you'll see water condensation drip in between on where the spring bolts are and where the gasket sits. And over time, the donut gaskets, they crumble, and so it will start to leak through there on the two ends. And so more often than not, it's not just about replacing the bank 1 sensor 2 oxygen sensor, but you also have to fix that leak as well. And you may get other codes such as the P013A catalyst efficiency code, but you have to take note and take into consideration that the old bank 1 sensor 2, it was very lazy, so it was not able to pick up the issues at the time. And so when you put a new sensor in, it will start to see that there's a catalyst efficiency code. So the issue here is that the old sensor was lazy and was not working as it should. And so the check engine light does not come on usually unless something is major. And so for minor things, as the sensor gets older and older over the years, it's not going to see much. But as soon as it hits a certain threshold, and then the computer sees that there's a problem, is going to trip a code and set the check engine light. So I just wanted to make you guys aware that just replacing that sensor is going to fix that particular problem, but there may be some other underlying problem that was not there before, or it was there, but it was just that the sensor was not picking the issue up. So don't be surprised that there's a P0420 code after replacing the sensor. And one other thing I wanted to mention is that the catalytic converter on these vehicles, or actually on all vehicles, they act like an oxygen storage unit. And so the computer is constantly checking the oxygen content inside the catalytic converter. So it's making sure that it's working at peak efficiency. And so when there's a problem, the air, fuel, and the oxygen sensors, they talk to each other and communicate with each other. And so if there's an issue, the computer will pick that up and trip a check engine light and set that particular code for on whatever the issue is. And so the computer is always constantly is monitoring and checking the oxygen content inside the exhaust, and particularly the efficiency of the catalytic converter by utilizing the air fuel ratio sensors and the oxygen sensors. And so now I'm going to fix that leak first, and then I'm going to follow up with the customer to see if the check engine light still comes back for the P013A code, because unmetered or unmonitored oxygen is entering the exhaust at the moment. Even if it's a pinhole leak or a tiny leak, it can upset the readings for the oxygen sensor as well as the air fuel sensor. But the oxygen sensor is closest to where the leak is, so it's going to affect that particular sensor for the most part. The computer is now thinking that there is more oxygen in the catalytic converter, and so it's seeing that there's an issue, and it's because that there's more switching activity with the bank 1 sensor too, because it's a new sensor and all of the other sensors are old and lazy. It thinks that there's a problem now, and there could be a problem because it was not picked up earlier. So after I fix this exhaust leak, we'll see on what happens. If the P013A code comes up for bank 1 catalytic converter, then it's most likely is going to be a bad catalytic converter. After that, I'll be doing some diagnostics on that later on, and then and just go from there. And that's only if the catalytic converter trips again. The vehicle is 346, probably 347,000 kilometers now, so it's most likely has reached the end of its service life. Catalytic converters don't really go forever. They can go for a long time if the vehicle is properly cared for and taken care of. But aside from that, there's a limited lifespan on these catalytic converters, and just like any other part, it's not going to last forever. That's it for today. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please don't forget to give it a like, and please consider subscribing to my channel if you're not already a subscriber, and please don't forget to hit that bell notification if you haven't done so. I'll see you guys in the next one. Have a good day and take care.